Hashem, Boker Tov. Today's daf yomi is Menachos daf Samachas. We're going to start on Samach Zayin Amabei 67b, 5 lines from the bottom. The Gemara had said in our Mishnah there was a dispute between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda about on the 16th of Nisan when they came into, after they brought the Omer offering in the base of Mikdash, which was called the Yom HaNev, and that's when the new grain that was planted was permitted. Mishnah says that they came out to the marketplace and it was already filled with the toasted flour. So Rabbi Meir says the rabbis were not happy with this. Rabbi Yehuda says they were happy. Rabbi Meir says they weren't happy because since they were preparing the flour when it was prohibited, they might come to eat it. Rabbi Yehuda wasn't concerned about that. So the Gemara asked, Rabbi Yehuda wasn't concerned that you shouldn't deal with the flour because you might come to eat from it. But don't we have a contradictory source? Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda Mar Bodkin or Arba'asar. Now Rabbi Yehuda says you're supposed to check for chametz on the night of the 14th. Let's say you didn't. Arba'asar Shachris, check in the morning. B'shas Sabir, and when you're even during the time where it's supposed to be burned. But from that point on, Rabbi Yehuda says, don't check because you might come to eat from it if you find it on Pesach. So we see Rabbi Yehuda is concerned that maybe you'll come to eat from it. Whereas the Chachamim there they argue with him and they say you keep checking if you never did the B'dika. So the Chachamim Omrim lo badak. The Chachamim say if you didn't check, continue to check. So Amar Rabba or Rabba, depending on the girsa. So Rabba says, Shani Chadash. The reason why Rabbi Yehuda says by Chadash we're not concerned, but by Chametz we are. Chadash is different. First answer. Mitoch shelo hitartelo ela yidei kituf zacharhu. So because the Omer is not, you're not allowed to harvest the Omer in the normal manner. That has to be done but by hand, not by using a tool. And therefore it'll be a shinoi and he'll remember it. So Abaye challenges, this is why we think it's Rava, or those who say it's Rava. Abaye challenges this, says Teinach Ketzira. I understand the harvest there's a shinoi, but Techina, Varkada, the grinding and the sifting it out, Ma'iko and Meimer, how would he know that is where's the shinoi there? And so therefore maybe he'll come to eat from it. So Rava responds, "Halo kasha, klina berechaya diyada." So that's there is a shinoi. That's not difficult. The grinding takes place with a hand mill as opposed to a water mill. And arkata algabe nafa. And the sifting, you use the back of the utensil. So there is a shinoi there. So he won't eat from it. And then the Gemara says, "But beis hashlachin the sharia katsira." But what about a field that's irrigated? That there. It is there you're allowed to harvest it because if you don't harvest it, Beis Hashlachin. So basically, in the Beis Hashlachin Shabbat in the irrigated field and in the valleys or the irrigated fields and the valleys, even prior to the harvest, where we say that. Prior to the waving of the Omer, you're allowed to harvest it because we're concerned that we say that the Omer won't come from it because it's a bad crop. And number two, if you don't do it, it'll get ruined. There you're allowed to harvest it of a low gochin, but we don't stack up the crops. Michael and Maimer, why did they not make a gezerah on that stuff that you're allowed to do without a shinoi? Because don't you have to be concerned that you're going to come to eat from it? So the reason why you could harvest it is because otherwise it'll get ruined, but the stacking you won't get ruined. But anyway, we don't say that you have to do it differently, and there you might come to eat from it. So therefore, for these reasons, Abaye rejects Rava's explanation that it was because Rabbi Yehuda was saying that Rameir is saying you're going to come to eat from it, but here it's being done with a shinoi. But then what's the case by the irrigated field? Elam Abaye. The reason why we don't have to be concerned here is chadash badal minei. The chadash, the new grain, you didn't eat it the whole year, so you're not anywhere near it. You're separate from it. The chametz lo badal minei, but the chametz you're used to it. You're being around it the whole year, so you might come to eat from it. So Rava responds, Amarava to Rabbi Yehuda, Kasha. You're bothered by why Rabbi Yehuda says By the Chadash, we're not concerned, but by the Chametz, we are. But the Rabbanan will kasha. What about the fact that here, Rabbi Meir, the Rabbanan says we are worried, but by Chametz is not worried. El so that's a problem with you. El Amar Rabbi Yehuda, the Yehuda will kasha, Kedeshaninan. Like Rabbi says, my answer is because there is being done with a shinoi. I'm not bothered by Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbanan will kasha. Why the Rabbanan say here we're worried, but not by Pesach? Because the reason why we're not worried about Chametz and Pesach is who atzmo mechazer of l'sarfon mechoach. He is going to he's the one going to burn it. That's what his attempt is to do. So you think he's going to eat from it while he's going to burn it? So therefore, he can do a bedika. Rashi Amar the Rabbi Yehuda will kasha. He says, no, I'm not bothered by the contradiction with Rabbi Yehuda. Why is here Rabbi Yehuda not bothered that he may come to eat from it by the Chadash? Kemach koli tanan. Because Rabbi Yehuda says that the reason is because it says in the Mishnah, Kemach Vikoli Tanan, meaning to say that they would sell the Kemach and the flour and the toasted grain, and those are not edible in that form. And so therefore you don't have to be concerned that you might come to eat from it. But this position of Rav Ashi is not accepted. It's external position. Because I understand why they shouldn't make the decree on when it's toasted onward, because that's not edible. Okay, but when it's in its stalk form, you might come to eat from it. So therefore, that's a problem with Rabbi Yehuda's position. With Rav Ashi's explanation of Rabbi Yehuda. If you want to say, well, there is going to be through a shinoi, through the plucking, like Rava, well, then basically, how would Rava explain why it's permitted in the Beis HaShlachin to harvest it when there's no shinoi? And therefore, we reject the first and the third explanation and go with Abayi's explanation. Just Chadash, a person is separated from the whole year, so he won't compete it, but Chametz, he's not. And that's why Rabbi Yehuda is strict by Chametz and not Chadash. So anyway, up to the next Mishnah. Mishikara va'omer. Once the Omer was offered, Hutar Chadash Miyan, the Chadash was immediately permitted. Harachokim mutarim michatzos yom u'hawan. Those who are far away from Jerusalem, they were allowed to eat it immediately from noon because they knew that it wasn't delayed. We'll see why the Gemara is going to explain. Mishachar Beis HaMikdash, once the temple was destroyed, Hiskim Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai Shea Yoma Nefkula Aser. Even though once the temple was destroyed, from the morning of the 16th, it was biblically permitted. Well, this is the way we're reading the Mishnah at this point. The Gemara is going to have a new reading of it in the conclusion. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said that day should be, he made a takana that the whole day of the waving should be prohibited. Because it's, excuse me. Rabbi Yehuda says it's biblically prohibited that whole day, unless the Omer was brought, because it says until this day. So Rabbi Yehuda says the whole day is prohibited, but not rabbinically, biblically. And why are those who are far away permitted from midday on? This goes back to the first part of the Mishnah that those who are, when the temple was standing, those who are far away from Jerusalem are allowed from midday on, because the reason is because they know that the court is not lazy, and the court will of course bring the Omer in the morning when it's supposed to, at the beginning of the morning. So Rav Shmuel and Amri Travayo, Bisman Shabbos Hamikdash Kayim, Rav and Shmuel both taught when the temple was standing, Omer Matir. The Omer is what allowed the new grains to be brought. Bisman She'im Beis Hamikdash Kayim, when there's no temple, Heyer Mizrach Matir. When there is no temple anymore, the sunrise, Rashi said, Taneit Tzachama Shaltez Zayin, the sunrise of the 16th, that is what allows a new grain to be permitted. We see from here that from the Torah, the Neitzach Hama has the power of the Beis HaMikdash. When the temple was standing, you needed the Omer to allow the new grain on the 16th. But when there's no temple, then once the sun rises, then you could eat the new grain. My time. What's the reasoning that from the morning of the 16th it's permitted? Trei Kraiksivi. That there's two verses. Ad aviachem. One pasuk says until you bring the Omer. Miksiv ad etzem hayom hazeh. And another pasuk says that day it's permitted. Haketza bisman kam bisman shebeis hamikdash kaim. When the temple was standing, it's when the Omer was brought. Kam bisman she'ein beis hamikdash kaim. When the temple was not standing, it's the morning of the 16th, the sunrise, that's what allows it. Rish Lakish Damar Travayu. Rish Lakish says, Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish both say, Afilu bisman shebeis hamikdash kaim. Hey, or Mizrach Matir. They say even when the temple is standing, the morning of the 16th is what allowed the Omer. But so the Gemara challenges, but don't say until you bring it. Well, mitzvah, that's just ideal. But doesn't it say Mishikar Omer Huter Chadash Miyad? Doesn't it say once the Omer was brought that the Chadash was permitted immediately? Well, mitzvah. Omer Haya Matir. What does it mean that the Omer? What about the fact that it states? In the next Mishnah, the Omer would allow the Medina, the Omer would allow it in the Medina, outside of the temple, and the two loaves would allow it in the temple, meaning say it's not the sunrise. The mitzvah, that's just for mitzvah. So, and then a fourth attempt, Mishachar on the top of 68b, Mishachar Beis HaMikdash, once the temple was destroyed, his king Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai Yom Nef Kul Asar. He said, Yochanan Zakkai said that the whole day of the waving shall be prohibited. My time, and what's his reasoning? Because the temple will speedily be rebuilt. And once they didn't, we eat it last year when the sun rose. And they'll think we could eat it also this year. Omer matir. So we see from here that the Omer is what allows it, not the sunrise. And if you're going to say that the answer to that is just a mitzvah that the Omer allows it, misham mitzvah leikum exor. Would he really make a takana because just ideal? So Amram Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai b'shitas Rabbi Yehuda Amra. Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai really holds like Rabbi Yehuda, who says that it's only permitted. The reason why he made this takana is the reason is that he holds that once the temple was destroyed, you can't eat it the whole 16th day, because he holds like Rabbi Yehuda, who says Minat Torah Aser, that it's biblically prohibited on the 16th day. It says Adai Etzem Hayom Hazeh, Adi Tzumo Shel Yom, because Savar Adva Abakla. So he says it's prohibited the entire 16th day. Umi Savar Akavasi. Couldn't really say that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai holds like Rabbi Yehuda. Didn't he argue with him in our Mishnah? The time Mishchar Beis HaMikdash, when the temple was destroyed, his king Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he made a takana sheyeh yom hanefku, so that the whole day of waving is prohibited. So I'm Rabbi Yehuda, Minat Torah, and Rabbi Yehuda says, isn't that biblically prohibited? Minat Torah, so we see from here Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai saying now Rabbi Yehuda, because he's saying it's a takana that's prohibited on the 16th day once the temple was destroyed, and Rabbi Yehuda is saying that it's biblically prohibited. So the Gemara says, no, Rabbi Yehuda would the katai. Rabbi Yehuda is one to make a mistake. Who's so there? Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai midrabanan kamer. He's at the position. And then Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai was saying it was prohibited. But it's not the case. Midiaraisa kamer. Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai was really saying it's prohibited biblically. The Gemara says, how can you say Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai is saying it's prohibited biblically? V'ah hiskin hatani. It says it says he made a takana. My hiskin, darash hiskin. It means that not that he made a takana, but he looked into the Torah and he realized what it was, v'hiskin, and he fixed the matter. He made and he fixed it, and that's what it means. Not that he made a takana, and so he taught the law that is really biblically prohibited. Papa Ravun Rav Yeshua Achli Chadash, and now we're dealing with another question. If it's biblically prohibited on the 16th day, so do we have to say that outside of Israel, we should also not eat the new grain on the 17th day because of what's called Tzveika Diyoma? We're not sure which is the actual day of Yom Tov, and so therefore we have to add on an extra day. So we say, our Papa and Rapuna B'Rav Yeshua Achli Chadash Ba'orta Deshitza. They ate the new grain the night after the 16th. Nagei Shevasar. We're eating into the morning of the 17th. Because they said Chodesh b'chutz la'aretz d'Rabbanan. They said outside of Israel, Chodesh is really only rabbinically prohibited. Who was fake lo chashinan. And so therefore, since it's a suffix d'Rabbanan here, whether or not the 17th day is just a suffix, just a doubt whether or not the extra day is the 16th day or not. Since it's rabbinic, we don't have to be strict. They ate on the morning of the 17th day. They thought it's biblically speaking, the 17th day is prohibited. And so therefore they were concerned that maybe they're off a day, and so therefore they didn't eat it on the night of the 17th. Nevertheless, they didn't have to wait until the 18th because they hold like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who says Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai midrabanan kamer. They said Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was saying that day is prohibited only rabbinically. The chitakin or yom hanef was fake takin. So therefore, this takana was only for that for this yom hanef, but not for the next day, for the 16th day, not the 17th. Amar Ravina, Amrli aim. So Ravina said to me, my mother, or the one person who raised me, said, he said, your father would not eat from the new grain until the night of the 17th night going into the 18th day. There's several like Rabbi Yehuda. Those like Rabbi Yehuda that it's biblically prohibited on Yom HaNev. And so therefore it's biblically prohibited. And he also do have the concern, he doesn't accept that outside of Israel it is rabbinic. And so therefore, excuse me. And so therefore he was concerned to have a doubt of the 17th day. So therefore he didn't eat it until the 18th day. Must be that he's of the position that it's biblical outside the land of Israel. So now up to the next Mishnah. Ha-Omer, Ha-Yamatir b'Medina. The barley offering would allow the new grain to be eaten outside of the temple, and the shtei lechem b'mikdash, the 2 loaves of bread, would allow the new grain to be to be used inside the karban Menachos, to be used in the base of mikdash. Aim aviyim Menachos to be kuram of minchas behema. Go them Omer. So you're not allowed to bring from the new grain the Menachos or the bikurim or the minchas of the behema, the minchas of sachim, from the new grain. Kodem Omer, before the Omer was brought, and im heavy, and if you brought it from a korban that was disqualified, from a grain that was disqualified, apostle, it's disqualified. Kodem Ashtei Alechem Lo Yevi, before the 2 loaves of bread, you should not bring the minchas and bikurim. Vim hevi kosher. So before, you're not allowed to bring the mincha and the bikurim and the minchas behema before the omer, and if you brought it, it's disqualified. But you're also not allowed to bring it before the shtei lechem in the temple, but if you brought it there, it's kosher. So Yosef Rabbi Tarfon the kosher ma bin kodem omer or kodem shtei lechem. How come if you brought it before the 2 loaves of bread, it's okay b'di'evet, but before the omer, it's not okay even b'di'evet? So Amar Afanav, so Rabbi Tarfon was asked this question. So Yehuda Bar Nechemia said, no, there's a distinction. Before the Omer was brought, all the grain is prohibited even outside the temple. So therefore we say if you brought it in the temple, it's disqualified. Tomar, you're going to say the same thing. They're going to say the same thing before the 2 loaves of bread, where then it's allowed by a regular person. And so therefore, inside the base of Mikdash, we're going to say b'di'evet it's okay. So Shasak Rabbi Tarfon. So Rabbi Tarfon was quiet. So Savu Panav Shal Rabbi Yehuda ben Nechemia. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Nechemia's face was like glowing. He's like, I bested the Rebbe. So Amar Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva said, Yehuda Tzavu Panecha Sheishavta Zakin. You're so happy that you got this elder, you defeated him in an argument. I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't live a long life. That time, that period was the 2 weeks before Pesach, which is exactly the time we're in now. So Sha'alti Acharav. And when I went up for Shavuot, I asked where Yehuda ben Nechemia was. Yehuda ben Nechemia Eichanu, V'amoi Niftar V'alcho. They said he died, gone. So we see Rabbi Yehuda took it as a punishment that the curse of Rabbi Akiva was fulfilled. Amar Nachman bar Yitzchak, Yehuda ben Nechemia, according to Yehuda ben Nechemia, who says that since it's prohibited outside the community, it's the b'diavad even prohibited in the temple. But if it's permitted outside the temple, b'diavad it's permitted in the temple. So then the nesachim and bikurim from the wine and that harvested that was ripened prior to the Omer, sheikrivam kodem Omer, that you brought prior to the Omer ksherin because those weren't prohibited and they're allowed for a hajjot. We didn't say the bikurim. If you brought the grapes for the bikurim, it should be okay. If you brought the wine that ripened early before the Omer, it should be okay. So pshita, it's obvious. Of course they're allowed. Just like, of course, no. Maldatim, he might have thought Hasamu that only with respect to the mincha, to hutter mikolo, it's a hedge where it was permitted. But here it was never prohibited to be permitted. I might have thought, so therefore you can't bring it prior to the Omer. Kamash Moan. So Gemara says, but kol shekei nachadu, it's larko. For sure in this case, if you bring those grapes for the Nisachem, for the Omer, it's going to be permitted. Gemara brings a question, a series of 4 questions with respect to the shtei lechem that allow the new grain. So let's say you brought the 2 loaves out of order, meaning to say, what's the case? Echidami. You go into Zarinu, a person sowed the wheat, bein omer l'shtei lechem, and a person planted the wheat between the Omer and the 2 loaves. I did in the month of Iyar. V'chol apalayu shtei alechem v'Omer, and so therefore this shtei alechem, they first had a new 2 loaves brought, which were on Shavuos, and afterwards was the Omer. So therefore, we say that the new mincha that was brought, that was made from wheat, is going to be? Can we bring a mincha that was made from wheat immediately after the Omer, or do we have to say we have to wait for the 2 loaves of bread on Shavuos? Do we say kisidra and sharian? No, it needs to be done in order, right? And so therefore, it needs the Omer followed by the shtei lechem. Shalok kasidra and lo sharian. If it's done out of order, it's not permitted. Odoma shalok kasidra and nami sharian. Maybe if you do it out of order, it's also permitted. So Amarabba Tashma v'im takriv minchas bikurim says in our parsha this week, if you bring a minchas bikurim, minchas omer kosim and damer, that's referring to the mincha of the Omer. It's not clear from a text, the written text, what exactly that pasuk in our parsha is referring to. We know it refers to the minchas Omer. Me'echan ba, where did that Omer come from? Minas Oren. It would come from the barley. Maybe it comes from the wheat. So Rabbi Elazar Omer, Nemer Aviv b'Mitzrayim. It says Aviv b'Egypt, Nemer Aviv v'Doros. And by the Minchas Omer, it says Aviv. Im din kriv Minchas bikurim Aviv. Ma Aviv amor b'Mitzrayim se'orin. Just like the Aviv that said by Egypt, it says Ki Asora Aviv. There it was barley. Af Aviv amor Doros se'orin. So we see from here that Minchas Omer comes from the barley. Rabbi Kiva Omer Matzinu Yachid Shemevi Chovasu Min Achitin and Chovasu Min Asorin. Sometimes an individual brings a wheat offering, sometimes a barley offering. But Tzibor also Mevi and Chovasu Min Achitin, Mevi and Chovasu Min Asorin. Also, the community does. They bring an offering from the wheat and the barley. And if you want to say the Omer comes from the wheat, then we will never have a case that the community brings its offering from the barley. So it must be that Minchas Omer comes from the barley. Davar acher, Imata Omer Menachitin, Ein Shtei Lechem Bikurim. And alternatively, if you say the Omer comes from the wheat, then the Shtei Lechem are not the first offering from the new crops, because the Omer came before it, and that was from the wheat. And it says, "B'yoma bikurim, so you won't be able to understand that puzzling mimbar. The misa the shtei alechem shel kesidron sharion. And if you want to say that shtei alechem out of order is still going to allow the wheat, mishkachas law, it is possible to say that according to this last answer, you could say mishkachas law. You could say a case where the shtei alechem is the first offering. The makriv omer mehanoch the ashrush kodem shtei lechem. Uvasar omer dishtake, that you could have a circumstance where you bring the omer from those things that took root prior to the shtei lechem, and that was after the omer of last year. The shtei lechem mehanoch the ashrush kodem omer the ashru basar the shtei lechem the dishtake. So you could have that circumstance. In order to no, that's not a good proof. Misavras bikurim or peirakam rinan. No, do you really think that the pasuk is referring to the two loaves of bikurim that allow all the wheat that are dependent upon them, and then it will be the case that this wheat is still prohibited to the temple? No, the Torah was talking about that the altar cannot eat it. So therefore, the mizbeach has already, if you want to say that the omer came from the wheat, then the altar has already eaten from the fruits of that year. So therefore, that pasuk is referring to that pasuk in Mamidbar is referring to the altar, not to the people. Okay, that's today's daf. Baruch Hashem, we'll stop here, and you want to say a